The meeting room on Galactic Survey Commission Station Velka was large and cold. The walls were smooth and pale, and the light inside was the kind of blue-white glow that made every face look tired. Around the long oval table sat representatives from 11 civilizations. Some had 4 arms, some breathed through filters, some sat in chairs built for bodies that did not bend the way human bodies did. They had all come here for the same reason: Karath 9. The planet had been in the survey database for over 200 years. Every civilization that had ever pointed a scanner at it had walked away with the same conclusion. The core was wrong. Not just hot, wrong. It burned at temperatures that dissolved most known alloys. It pulsed in irregular cycles, sending pressure waves up through the mantle that cracked rock like dry clay. And the surface shifted. Vents opened and closed without warning, pushing out gases that could strip the lining from a breathing lung in under a minute. The gravity near the poles fluctuated in ways that confused navigation systems and put dangerous stress on ship hulls. Karath 9 was not a difficult planet. It was not a challenging planet. It was a dead end, a warning, a red mark on every map that said, "Do not go here. There is nothing here worth dying for." Ambassador Dreva of the Veloci Collective stood at the head of the table. She was tall, with pale green skin and wide black eyes that caught the light and held it. She had been in this room before, for other votes, on other matters. This one, she felt, would be simple. She placed both hands flat on the table and looked around at the gathered delegates. The planet Karath 9 has been under review for the 4th time in 60 years, she said. Her voice was calm and even. Each previous review has returned the same result. The geological instability makes any form of settlement impossible. The atmospheric toxicity levels exceed safe limits for every known species. The core activity is not decreasing. In fact, the latest sensor data shows a 15% increase in deep pressure events over the past decade. She paused to let that settle. The Commission's recommendation is to formally seal Karath 9 as a permanent hazard zone. No landing permits, no survey missions, no resource extraction attempts. The planet is to be marked as restricted on all navigation charts and removed from the active colonization registry. There were nods around the table. A few quiet murmurs of agreement. No one pushed back. Why would they? The data was clear. The planet was a killer. The vote was called. 11 hands, claws, and limbs rose in agreement. The motion passed. Dreva allowed herself a small breath of satisfaction. It was the right call. It was the only call. She was already thinking about the next item on the agenda when the communication officer at the far end of the room made a soft, confused sound. "Ambassador," the officer said slowly, "there is an incoming transmission." "From which station?" The officer looked up. His expression was strange. "From the surface of Karath 9. The room went very quiet. Dreva turned. "Say that again." "The signal originates from the surface of Karath 9. It is a standard colonial operations report. Text and data format. A sender identification reads." The officer stopped and tilted his head. "Commander Greg Lawson, Earth Colonial Division." Nobody moved. Dreva walked to the officer's station and read the message herself. She read it twice, because the first time she was sure she had missed something. She had not missed anything. The message was short and professional. Commander Greg Lawson of the Earth Colonial Division was reporting in from Karath 9, Sector 7 Base Camp. The base had been operational for 3 years. Current population was 412. Crop yield from the Eastern Dome system was up by 18% from the previous quarter. The water recycling system was running at full capacity. There was a request for a second deep drilling team to be sent in the next supply rotation, along with an updated parts list for the geothermal tap network. At the bottom of the message, in the same plain, businesslike tone as the rest, was a note. It read, "Atmospheric venting in Grid C has been rerouted to the greenhouse system. Output increase is significant. We'll send full data in next report. Dreva set the data pad down on the table. She looked at the 11 delegates who had just voted to seal this planet as uninhabitable. No one said anything for a long moment. Then the delegate from the Saran Pact cleared his throat. "Is this a test?" "No," Dreva said. "Is the signal spoofed?" "The origin coordinates confirm it is coming from the surface," the officer said. "The signal strength and atmospheric interference patterns match a ground-level source. It is not spoofed." Another long silence. Greg Lawson had not sent the message in a hurry. There was no panic in it, no alarm. It read exactly the way a base commander's routine report was supposed to read: dry, factual, and mildly boring. He had not mentioned the commission. He had not mentioned the vote. He had not asked for permission to be there. He had simply reported in, the way someone does when they have been somewhere for a while and assume everyone already knows. The delegate from the Murrell Federation leaned forward. "How long did he say they have been there?" 3 years, Dreva said. The delegate sat back. 3 years, he repeated softly, as if saying it again would help it make more sense. It did not. Dreva walked back to her seat and looked at the vote results still displayed on the main screen. 11 in favor, 0 opposed. The unanimous decision that humanity had apparently not waited around for. She thought about what it meant. Not just the base, not just the 412 people somehow alive on a planet that every scan said should be killing them. She thought about the tone of that message, about the parts request, about the note at the bottom, the one that said they had rerouted the toxic venting into their greenhouse system and were seeing significant output increases. They had not fought the planet. They had used it. Dreva picked up the data pad again and read the message a third time. She looked at the request for a second drilling team. She looked at the crop yield numbers. She thought about the 15% increase in deep pressure events that her own scientists had flagged as evidence the planet was becoming more dangerous, and the humans were drilling deeper into it. She set the data pad down very carefully. "We need to send an observation vessel," she said. No one disagreed. There was nothing to disagree about. The vote to seal the planet had passed 12 minutes ago, and there were already 412 humans living on it who had apparently not received the memo, or had received it and filed it somewhere at the bottom of a pile under a parts request and a crop yield report. The room felt different now. It had felt simple when they arrived. It did not feel simple anymore. Outside the station's wide observation window, the stars sat still and quiet. Somewhere out there, past the safe lanes and the mapped routes and the red warning markers on every chart. But a man named Greg Lawson was probably writing his next report and wondering when the second drilling team would arrive. The galaxy had called Karath 9 a death sentence. Greg had called it home. The Veloci observation vessel dropped out of faster-than-light travel at a safe distance from Karath 9, and immediately the instruments went loud. Captain Siva stood at the main console and watched the readouts stack up. Seismic activity in the lower crust, elevated. Atmospheric toxicity in the open zones, above safe limits. Surface temperature near the vent fields, extreme. Gravity fluctuations at the northern pole, present and active. The planet looked exactly the way every survey had ever described it. Angry, unstable, and entirely hostile to life. Science Officer Drayle stood beside her, scanning the data with the careful, unhurried focus he brought to every assignment. He was older than Siva, with the kind of patience that came from years of looking at things that did not make sense and waiting for them to explain themselves. "Life signs?" Siva asked. Drayle adjusted the sensor range. "Yes," he said, "concentrated in a single region on the eastern continent. The readings are strong, consistent with an active, functioning settlement." Siva looked at the planet on the main screen. It glowed a dull reddish-orange at the edges, where the atmospheric venting caught the light of the system's star. It did not look like a place where anything should be functioning. "Take us in," she said. They descended slowly, running full scans the entire way. The closer they got, the more the instruments complained. The pressure readings fluctuated, or the radiation counters ticked upward, and then leveled off as they moved past the equatorial band. The ship's hull temperature monitors registered the external heat and flagged a caution alert, which Siva dismissed. Then they crossed over the eastern continent and the picture changed. Below them, visible through the rust-colored haze, was a settlement. Not a ruin, not a crash site, not the kind of desperate cluster of shelters that survivalists threw together when things went wrong. This was a settlement, organized, structured, and clearly built to stay. There were dome-shaped structures arranged in a pattern that suggested planning. There were pathways between them. There were taller structures at the center that looked like processing towers or relay systems. And there, along the outer edge of the settlement, were long rows of what Drail's scanners identified as growing structures, agricultural domes, sealed and lit from within with warm, steady light. "They are farming," Drail said. Siva did not respond immediately. She was still looking at the screen. "Land us," she said finally. The ship set down on a flat, cleared area near the settlement's edge. Someone had marked out a landing zone. There were simple ground markers arranged in a neat square, the kind of practical detail that said, "We expected visitors. We prepared a place for them. Come ahead." The hatch opened, and the two of them stepped out into the filtered air of Karath 9. The air was breathable, which their suits confirmed, though it carried a faint mineral smell, something between hot stone and iron. The ground beneath their feet was solid, not shifting, not cracking, just ground. A woman was walking toward them. She was of medium height, with short dark hair and the kind of easy, unhurried stride that suggested she was not worried about much. She wore a standard colonial work suit, practical and worn in at the elbows, and she was carrying a datapad under one arm. She raised her free hand in a simple wave as she got closer. "You made good time," she said. "We figured someone would come check on us after the commission vote. I am Dr. Nora Hale, Base Science Lead. Welcome to Karath 9. Drail looked at her, then at the settlement behind her, then back at her. "You knew about the vote?" Siva said. "We monitor commission broadcasts," Nora said pleasantly. "Standard practice. Come on, I will show you around. Greg is in a planning meeting, but he said to go ahead without him." She turned and walked back toward the settlement. After a moment, Siva and Drail followed. The first thing Nora showed them was the outer shell of the main base dome. She pressed her hand flat against the wall as she walked and explained how it was built. Layered, pressure-adaptive composites on the outside, thermal regulators in the middle, and a flexible inner frame that could absorb seismic movement without cracking. She said it the way a person explains something they have explained many times before, clearly and without drama. "The first design cracked," she said. "During the 3rd month, we redesigned it. The second one held. We have not had a structural failure since." Drail was taking notes. Inside the dome, the air was clean and warm. The space was organized efficiently. Workstations, storage racks, a shared meal area where a few colonists sat eating and talking quietly. The colonists looked up when the aliens walked in. Some nodded. One younger man raised his mug in a casual greeting and went back to his meal. Nobody looked alarmed. Nobody looked particularly surprised. They looked like people at work. Nora took them through the energy system next. She walked them past the geothermal tap access points, which hummed with a low, steady vibration that Drail's instruments confirmed was consistent with power generation. She explained that the core's heat, the same heat that the Commission's report had listed as a primary lethal hazard, was being drawn up through a series of pressure-managed channels and converted into clean electricity. The entire settlement ran on it. Fully, with surplus. "We export nothing yet," Nora said. "We use all of it. but the projections suggest we will have excess capacity within 2 years. Siva stopped walking. You are generating surplus energy from the core of a planet the Commission classified as a permanent hazard zone. Yes, Nora said. And you have been doing this for 3 years. 2.5 for the energy system specifically. The first few months were mostly setup and mapping. Drayle pulled up the original survey report on his datapad. He scanned the danger classification section. Unstable core, lethal energy release risk. He looked at the quietly humming tap access point in front of him. Nora watched him read and offered nothing more. She did not seem interested in arguing the point. The system was running, and the numbers were right there on the display panel on the wall. She let those speak for themselves. They moved on to the greenhouse ring. This was where Drayle's composure started to slip just a little. The domes were full, rows and rows of crops growing in rich, dark soil under carefully filtered light. The plants were healthy. Some were ready to harvest. A young woman named Clara was moving between the rows with a small collection basket, checking leaves and making notes on a handheld device. She glanced up at the visitors and gave a polite nod. The soil is local, Nora said. We process it through a mineral filtering system to bring the toxicity down to safe levels. The minerals that come out of that process, the ones we filter away, go back into the nutrient cycle. Nothing is wasted. The atmospheric vents, Drayle said slowly. See, in the last transmission, the commander mentioned rerouting them to the greenhouse system. Nora smiled. That was my project. The vents release gas that is toxic in open air but rich in certain compounds that plants absorb well. We capture the output, strip the harmful elements, and feed what is left into the greenhouse atmosphere. Growth rates went up by 22% in the first month after we made the switch. Drayle stared at the plants for a moment. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, the survey report listed atmospheric venting as an extinction-level hazard. It listed it right, Nora said. It is dangerous. We just found a use for it. Siva had been quiet for a while. She was looking at the colonists moving through the greenhouse, at Clara with her basket, at the warm light filtering through the dome panels, as at the healthy rows of growing things on a planet that was supposed to have no growing things on it. How do you sleep? Siva asked. Knowing what is beneath you, knowing the ground could... Nora tilted her head. Could what? Move? She thought for a moment. The ground back home moves too. We have lived on moving ground for a long time. We learned to read it. Siva looked at her. Nora looked back, calm and steady. We read this ground too, Nora said. It just took a little longer. Greg Lawson was a tall man with a calm face and the kind of steady hands that came from years of working in places where unsteady hands caused problems. He met Drayle and Siva the next morning outside the Central Operations Building, holding 2 cups of hot coffee, one of which he offered to Drayle. Drayle looked at the cup, then at Greg, and then accepted it carefully. Greg smiled and led them inside. The operations building was the busiest space in the settlement. People moved through it with purpose, checking screens, transferring data, talking in short, focused sentences. Maps covered one whole wall. Not navigation maps. Surface maps, geological maps, the kind that showed fault lines, pressure zones, vent paths, and core pulse cycles in detail that Drayle had never seen in a survey document. You mapped all of this yourself? Drayle asked, stopping in front of the wall. Took about 8 months, Greg said. The survey data we had when we arrived was good for telling us the planet was dangerous. It was not good for telling us how the danger moved, when it moved, or what it did between the big events. We needed that, or so we mapped it. He pointed to a cluster of red lines near the settlement's position on the map. Vent paths, predictable within a 4-hour window most of the time, sometimes 6. We built the outer structures around them, not on top of them. Drayle studied the map closely. The level of detail was extraordinary. Every fault, every pressure channel, every known seismic cycle had been marked, labeled, and color-coded. It was not the work of someone trying to survive a dangerous planet. It was the work of someone who had decided to understand it. "I want to introduce you to the people who built this," Greg said. "Come on." He took them down a long corridor that sloped gently downward, leading into a section of the base built partially into the rock itself. The walls here were rough and warm to the touch, and the hum that Drayle had noticed near the geothermal taps was stronger here, a low, constant vibration that moved through the floor and up into the feet. At the end of the corridor was a large room filled with equipment that Drayle did not immediately recognize. Pipes ran along the walls and disappeared into the floor. Monitoring panels lined every surface, and standing beside the central console, looking at a schematic on a large screen, were two people. The man was broad-shouldered with graying hair and oil-stained work clothes. The woman was shorter, with her hair tied back, wearing a geology survey vest covered in pockets, most of which appeared to be full. "This is Carl Pruitt," Greg said, nodding to the man. "He designed and built the core tap network. And this is Bev Larson. She is our chief geologist. She mapped the core pulse cycles and figured out how to use them." Carl looked up from his schematic and gave a short nod. Bev turned around, saw the aliens, and her expression shifted into the focused look of someone who had been waiting to explain something. "Good timing," she said. "We just pulled the latest pulse data. I will walk you through it." She did not wait for them to agree. She simply turned back to the screen and began talking. She explained how the core of Karath 9 did not just burn, it breathed. It expanded and contracted in cycles. The cycles were not random. They had a rhythm, long and slow, like a heartbeat measured in days instead of seconds. It had taken Bev 4 months of constant monitoring to find the pattern. Once she found it, everything else became possible. "The survey reports flagged the pressure events as unpredictable," Bev said. "They were not unpredictable. They were just not observed long enough. You have to sit with a planet for a while before it tells you what it is doing." Drayle made a note of that sentence. He was not sure why, but it felt important. Carl took over at that point. He walked them through the tap network, not just the concept, but the engineering. The pipes were built from a composite he had developed on site, mixing materials brought from Earth with refined ore pulled from the upper mantle of Karath 9 itself. The result was a material that could handle the heat, flex with the pressure waves, and self-seal minor fractures using a thermal reaction built into the composite structure. "First version failed at the third junction," Carl said, in pointing to a spot on the schematic. "Too rigid. The pressure wave hit it and it cracked clean through. Nobody was hurt. We had the pressure dampeners in place. But we lost 2 weeks rebuilding. Second version had flexible joints at every connection point. That one held. This is the fourth version. It is better than the second." Drayle looked at the schematic. Then he pulled up the original Galactic Survey Commission report on his datapad and found the danger classification for the core energy output. He read it aloud, slowly. Carl listened without expression. When Drayle finished reading, Carl pointed at the monitoring panel on the wall. The panel showed energy output numbers. Stable, continuous, high-volume numbers. The power running through the entire settlement, right now, measured in real time. That is what we are doing with what the report called a lethal energy release risk," Carl said simply. He was not being unkind. He was just being accurate. Siva had been watching Carl the whole time. She had the look of someone trying to find a flaw in a structure and not finding one. "And when the pressure cycles peak?" she asked. "The large events?" "We shut the taps down 6 hours before the peak," Carl said. "The system bleeds off excess pressure through controlled vent paths, the ones Bev mapped. When the peak passes, we reopen the taps. We have done it 11 times. No damage, no injuries." You ride out the events, Siva said. We schedule around them, Bev corrected. She said it lightly, but the difference mattered, and she wanted it to be clear. Riding out implies you are just surviving. We plan the maintenance cycles, the drilling operations, and the surface work around the pulse schedule. The planet is not fighting us, we are just working with what it gives us. Greg watched the aliens process that. He could see it on their faces. The slow, careful work of minds trying to fit new information into frameworks that had not been built to hold it. He had seen that look before, on new colonists when they first arrived and stood at the edge of the settlement and really understood where they were. The difference was that the new colonists got used to it within a few weeks. He was not sure how long it would take for the rest of the galaxy. Drayle asked one more question before they left the tap room. He stood at the entrance looking back at the pipes and panels and the steady glow of the monitoring systems. Annan asked how many people had worked on the original design. 6 of us in the beginning, Carl said. Me, Bev, and 4 others. We were on site for the full first year before the rest of the settlement came. 6 people, Drayle said. 6, Carl confirmed. Drayle looked at the network that 6 people had built inside the core zone of a planet the galaxy had unanimously agreed was unsurvivable, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Then he closed his datapad. He did not need the survey report anymore. The survey report described a planet that no longer existed, or rather a planet that had existed until a small team of humans arrived, looked at it carefully, and decided to make it into something else. Greg refilled his coffee on the way out and offered Drayle another cup. This time, Drayle accepted it without hesitating. The report that Drayle and Siva filed with the Galactic Survey Commission was 62 pages long. Drayle had written most of it himself, carefully, over the 3 days it took their vessel to make the return journey. He had included everything: the geological maps, the energy output data, the agricultural production figures, the engineering schematics that Carl had shared with them, Bev's core pulse cycle charts, and a full record of every conversation they had during their time on the surface. He had not tried to soften it or frame it in a way that would make it easier to accept. He had simply written what he had seen, as clearly and as accurately as he could. He filed the report when they docked and went home to sleep. The emergency session was called the next morning, and the commission chamber was larger than the meeting room where the original vote had taken place. It could hold representatives from every member civilization at once, and today it was close to full. Delegates had arrived quickly, which told Drayle something about how seriously they were taking the situation. Some of them had not waited for a formal invitation. They had simply shown up. Drayle stood at the front of the chamber and presented the findings in the same clear, factual way he had written them. He did not add drama. He did not editorialize. He showed the data, explained the systems, and described what he had observed. When he finished, the room was loud for a long time. 6 delegations spoke in sequence, each one raising a version of the same objection. The settlement on Karath 9 was reckless. It was dangerous. And the humans had gotten lucky, and luck was not a sustainable colonial strategy. The planet was still unstable. The core pulse cycle that Bev had mapped could change. An unmapped event could destroy the settlement in a matter of hours. The humans were putting themselves in unnecessary danger, and by doing so, they were destabilizing a zone that had been designated off-limits for good reasons. The delegate from the Morel Federation put it most bluntly: this is not colonization. This is a gamble. And when the gamble fails, when the planet finally does what every scan has told us it will do, we will be expected to send rescue vessels into a hazard zone because humans decided to live somewhere they should not. There was a lot of agreement in the chamber after that. Then Lena Marsh stood up. She was Earth's diplomatic attaché to the Commission, and she had been sitting quietly in the human delegations section through all of it, with a datapad in her lap and a patient expression on her face. She was not a large person. She did not have a loud voice. but she had a quality that experienced diplomats develop over time: the ability to make a room pay attention without asking it to. She waited until the agreement noises died down. Then she placed a single document on the council table. It was a physical printout, not a data pad, a deliberate choice that made people look at it differently. "This is a full technical summary of the Karath 9 colony," she said. "It includes sustainability projections, medical records for every colonist over the past 3 years, structural failure rates for all base systems, geological event response records, and the 5-year expansion plan. And I would ask the Commission to read it before drawing conclusions about whether the settlement is sustainable." She let that sit for a moment. The medical records show 0 fatalities and 12 minor injuries over 3 years of operation on a planet this Commission classified as an extinction-level risk. The structural failure rate for the base systems is lower than the average for colonial settlements on planets with standard classifications. The energy system has not experienced a single uncontrolled failure. The agricultural output currently feeds the full population with reserves. She looked around the chamber. The Commission moved to seal this planet as permanently uninhabitable and passed that motion unanimously. The humans already living there, the ones who have been living there for 3 years, would like to know what. Exactly. The hazard zone is protecting at this point. The delegate from the Soran Pact leaned forward. "It is protecting future travelers from making the same mistake." "With respect," Lena said, "the humans on Karath 9 did not make a mistake. They made a plan. There is a difference." "The planet is still dangerous," another delegate said. "Yes," Lena agreed. "It is. So is Earth." She paused. "Earth has active tectonic plates that produce earthquakes capable of leveling cities. It has volcanic systems that have, in the geological past, blanketed entire continents in ash. It has weather systems that flatten everything in their path. It has ocean zones where the pressure would crush unprotected structures instantly. We have 7 billion people living on it. We have built cities on fault lines, harbors at the edges of storm coasts, and settlements near active volcanic zones. We did not do this because we did not understand the danger. We did it because we learned how to live with the danger." The chamber was quieter now. "Karath 9 is not a mistake," Lena said. "It is not a gamble. It is a human colony, built by human engineers who studied the planet for months before they built a single structure. The core pulse cycle that everyone in this room is so concerned about. Bev Larson mapped it in 4 months with 6 people and equipment that fit in 2 cargo containers. The geothermal tap network that everyone in this room called theoretically impossible. Carl Pruitt built it in 7 months, and it has been running without failure for 2 years. These are not lucky people. These are skilled people." She picked up the physical printout from the table and held it up. "That the Commission has 2 choices. It can acknowledge what the Karath 9 colony has accomplished and update the planet's classification accordingly. Or it can continue to classify a thriving, functional, growing human settlement as an uninhabitable hazard zone." She set the document back down. "One of those options reflects reality, the other does not." The room was quiet for a long time after that. The delegate from the Veloci Collective, not Dreva, who had recused herself from the session after filing Drail's report, spoke carefully. "The Commission is not opposed to human colonization of difficult worlds. We are concerned about the precedent. If we accept Karath 9, we are saying that any civilization can settle any planet, regardless of safety classification, as long as they do it before anyone stops them." "No," Lena said. You are saying that if a civilization demonstrates over 3 years, with full data and 0 fatalities, that they can live safely in a place that was previously considered unsafe, you are willing to update your records to reflect the current reality. That is not a dangerous precedent. That is science." The delegate had no immediate answer for that. The vote to move the matter to a formal review committee passed. It was not the answer Lena had asked for, but it was not nothing. The chamber filed out slowly in clusters of hushed conversation. Drayle found Lena near the exit. "You knew they would not change the classification today," he said. "Yes," she said. "Then why the argument?" Lena looked at him for a moment. "Because Greg Lawson's next report is due in 2 weeks," she said. "And the one after that. And the one after that. Every report he sends is more data. More months of 0 fatalities, more crop yield numbers, more energy output records." She tucked the data pad under her arm. "I am not trying to win this argument today. I am just making sure that when the data wins it for me, everyone in that room remembers that they had the chance to understand it earlier." She walked out. Drayle stood for a moment in the emptying chamber, then pulled out his data pad and opened Greg Lawson's last transmission. He read it again, from the beginning. It still sounded like a routine report. It still sounded like a man who had been somewhere for a while and simply assumed everyone already knew. 3 years after Lena Marsh stood in the commission chamber and asked what the hazard zone was protecting, the settlement on Karath 9 had a name: Harrow's Landing. It was named after Pete Harrow, the geologist who had been the first human to step onto the surface of Karath 9 during the initial survey that had preceded the colony mission by 8 months. Pete had not been famous. He had not been the mission commander or the lead scientist or the person whose name appeared at the top of the project documents. He had been the geologist who volunteered to be the first one off the ship, whose job was simply to walk on the ground and confirm that the boots could hold, and who had stood there in his environmental suit with the orange sky above him and the shaking ground under him, and sent back a voice message that said, "Ground is rough but solid. Seismic activity is present and measurable. Air is bad in the open but manageable with filtration. I would like to stay and look around, if that is all right." Mission Command had given him the green light. Pete had spent the next 6 hours walking the site and sending back data. His report had been the foundation of everything Carl and Bev built later. Pete himself had stayed on through the full colony setup and was now the head of the Geological Survey Division at Harrow's Landing, which employed 31 people and had by this point mapped every significant feature within a 400-kilometer radius of the base. The population of Harrow's Landing had passed 2,000 in the spring. The second wave had arrived as planned. The third wave was scheduled. A school had been built, a low, wide building near the center of the settlement, with pressure-adaptive walls and a roof that could seal in 12 seconds if the atmospheric sensors triggered. It had never needed to seal. It had sealed twice in drills, and the children had treated it like a game. When Drayle's shuttle landed at Harrow's Landing on a clear morning, clear by Karath 9 standards, which meant the sky was a deep amber rather than the cloudy rust orange of active vent days, there was someone waiting for him at the landing zone. Not Greg this time. Greg was running a coordination meeting for the third wave's arrival logistics. He had sent Clara instead, the young woman Drayle remembered from the greenhouse, who was now 3 years older and had the comfortable confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was and exactly what she was doing. She shook his hand and led him into the settlement. Drayle had prepared himself mentally for what he might find, and he had read every report filed from Harrow's Landing over the past 3 years. He had tracked the numbers. He knew the population, the output figures, the expansion timeline. He thought he had a reasonable picture. He did not have a reasonable picture. The streets, and they were streets, proper streets with clear paths and purpose, moved with people. Not just colonists in work gear moving between tasks. People. A woman carrying a bag of food from a market stall. 2 men talking at the corner of a building, one of them laughing. A group of children running past with the specific urgency of children who are late for something important. An older man sitting in a pressurized open-air seating area outside a food hall, drinking something hot and reading from a small handheld screen. There was noise, not the controlled, the careful noise of a working base, the comfortable, layered noise of a place where people had settled in and stopped thinking about where they were every minute of the day. Drayle walked through it slowly, trying to reconcile what his instruments had told him about this planet with what his eyes were telling him now. Nora found him near the greenhouse ring, where she was checking the latest growth cycle data with two of her team. She looked the same, maybe a little more tired around the eyes, with the look of someone who had been doing hard work for a long time and was glad to be doing it. She walked over and shook his hand warmly. "The East Ring expanded," she said, before he could say anything. "We added 4 new domes in the last rotation. We are growing 16 varieties now. 3 of them are new breeds. Developed here? For the soil conditions here. They do not exist anywhere else." Drayle looked at the domes. They were full, green and dense and alive. "You bred new crops," he said. "Bev helped with the mineral analysis. The soil here has compounds that earth crops do not process well. So we worked with it. The new breeds do." She shrugged, as if this was a minor detail. "We sent the seed data to Earth. They are interested." He toured the medical center with a doctor named Ray Colby, who walked him through a facility that looked entirely standard, clean, well-supplied, staffed by people who seemed unhurried because the caseload was manageable. Ray talked through the health data with the openness of someone who had nothing to hide and was used to being asked. The 3-year record was what Lena had presented to the commission. 0 fatalities, to 12 minor injuries, a handful of respiratory cases in the first year that had resolved once the filtration protocol was updated, and nothing since. "The main thing people struggle with at first is the noise," Ray said. "The vibration from the core tap network. Some people find it hard to sleep. They get used to it in a week or 2. After that, most of them say they sleep better here than anywhere they have lived before." Drayle found that hard to believe. He noted it anyway. The formal dinner that evening was held in the settlement's largest shared space, a long hall with tables running the length of it and warm light coming from panels in the ceiling. Most of the senior staff was there. Greg sat at the head of the table, eating with the easy appetite of someone who had done a full day's work. Carl was beside him, talking to Bev, who was gesturing at something and drawing a small diagram on a napkin to make her point. Pete Harrow sat across the table, older and quieter, listening more than talking, with the calm, watchful manner of a man who had seen a lot and trusted the people around him. Drayle gave a short address before the meal. He had not planned to say much. He said more than he intended. He told them that the Galactic Survey Commission had voted that week, in a full session, to formally update the classification of Karath 9. The red warning had been removed from all navigation charts. The permanent hazard zone designation had been dissolved. The planet had been reclassified. He read the new classification aloud. It said, "Human-occupied, stable, active colonial development in progress." The hall was quiet for a moment. Then Greg raised his glass. Around the table, other glasses went up. No one cheered loudly. It was not that kind of group. They raised their glasses and drank and went back to eating because the meal was good and they were hungry, and the classification change confirmed something they had already known for 3 years. Drayle sat down and looked at his own glass. Across the table, Pete Harrow caught his eye and gave a small nod. Pete did not say anything. He did not need to. He was the man who had stepped off the ship first, who had stood on the shaking ground and sent back a message asking if he could stay and look around, and the answer had turned out to be yes, and everything that followed had come from that. The galaxy had looked at Karath 9 and written it off. Pete had looked at it and asked if he could stay. That was the part Drayle kept returning to, then on the long journey home. Not the engineering, as remarkable as it was. Not the crop yields or the energy output or the health records. Those were the results. The part that mattered was what had come before all of it. The moment when a geologist stood on a dangerous, angry, hostile piece of rock and did not see a warning sign. He saw a foundation, and he asked if he could look around. The galaxy was still learning what that meant about the people from the small blue world. If Drayle had to guess, he thought it would take a while. They were still finding planets the rest of the galaxy had given up on. They were still sending back quiet, professional reports that read like routine check-ins and casually mentioned that they had rerouted a toxic vent into their greenhouse and seen a 22% increase in crop yield. He thought the galaxy would be learning for a very long time. He thought that was probably fine.